Welcome, everybody, to the 50th episode of the JewishDrinking.com podcast and video show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan. I'm excited to have first-time guests on the show, Aliza Lipkin. Welcome, Aliza.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So for those who are less familiar with Aliza Lipkin here, she writes and she teaches. She lives in Israel, and she has done videos for a few years now on the Parsha. And starting just this fall, beginning with Parshat Breshit, she also now has guests on. And that's actually how I came to, gain awareness of you, Aliza, which is you had guests on who I was familiar with. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really neat. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we are discussing in this episode, Lot and his daughters, the episode it's this week's Parsha in Genesis 19. And it's funny, I'm going to share this with you, Aliza. This is actually the fourth episode for the show I've done on Lot and his daughters. Last year we had Aaron Roller and Rabbi Aaron London. This year we've had, last week, Rabbi Josh Uter, and this week you. So it was not intended to be the most popular topic I've discussed so far on the show, but that's life. It happens. So
it's really funny because people try and stay away from it, and you've done 4 on the topic where people are usually no.
Which it's a great, there's a lot of space to explore them since people generally shy away from it.
Right. For good reason. Yeah. It's a tough one. I really looked at it and reread it and tried to scrutinize the Pesukim to really get down to the bottom of what's going on in that difficult story. And I'm a big fan of stripping away what we know from Rashi and the Mefarshim and trying to see what's there, what the Pshat gives you with, and then I like to look, but I really like to try and see it with fresh eyes. And it really does always somehow enlighten me, because not everything is pointed out. And I think there are things that are there for good reason.
Yeah.
So hopefully I hope to discuss it.
I think it's particularly interesting with this story where there seems to be, it's almost as if the storytelling is a little bit muted and there's so much opportunity for filling in the blanks. And yes, I discussed that last week with Rabbi Josh Uter about the Midrashim, but it's such a fascinating one because not everything is spelled out. There's still a lot of room. It's kind of curious about what's going on. So I think there's a lot of room for exploration.
Yes, indeed there is.
Yeah, so for those maybe less familiar, I'm just going to bring it up on the screen, and we can get rolling from there. So for those less familiar, we have chapter 19 in Genesis, and we've got, although it really is 30 through 38, it finishes out the chapter. We can also, I'm going to start with verse 29. We'll go through it. I'm just going to do a quick overview, quickly read it, and then Aliza we'll get to chatting. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt, God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the people. So then Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. And the older one said to the younger one, our father's old, and there's not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of all of the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father. So that night they made their father drink wine, and the older went in and lay with their father. He did not know when she lay down, nor when she rose. The next day the older one said to the younger, see, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father. That night also they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down, nor when she rose. Thus the 2 daughters of Lot came to be with child by their father. The older one bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. And the younger also bore a son, and she called him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today, until this day. So there's a lot going on. And it's funny what you were saying earlier, that even each year coming across the same stuff, you can have fresh eyes, even like different experiences, have different insights that you can bring each year. For you, what stands out about the story? Anything that you just like top of mind that says talk about me?
Yes, as a matter of fact, but it would start a little earlier when we're told first that the angels came to Lot, and something very interesting that I always like to do is compare and contrast. So of course we can go back to when the angels first came to Abraham and how he greeted them and what he said and what he did. Mm-hmm. And then when the two then came to Lot, what he said, how he greeted them, and what he did. And then even after that, if you take the words of what he said and what happened, and you compare it to the narrative that you just read, you can find certain similar words that I think are hinting to something that's deeper. I think it's in the Midrash that talks about Lot that he wanted to go to Sodom because he wanted to engage in licentious behavior, but he wanted to do it secretly. He, something that he was going to do is he at least had some sort of sense of busha, of dignity, that he wasn't going to outright do it like the people of Sodom, maybe under the guise of being righteous. And because he knew from being with Abraham, I guess he was probably torn also as well. But so I actually, that interpretation speaks to me because of the words, and why it does is it's interesting. It's because a few hints that I find scattered in there. First of all, when he comes to Abraham, so we know how Abraham is extremely hospitable, and he offers them to come and sit and wash your feet, and I'll give you a little bit of bread, and then he goes and runs and gets everything, the milk, the meat, he does it all, and he stands over them, makes sure they eat and all that. Now when they come to Lot, the interesting thing is the first thing Lot says is, come stay with me the night. Then he says, and you'll wash your feet, and then you'll get up and you'll go in the morning. He doesn't say anything about food. The first thing that's on his mind when he goes and runs to them, gets them, is come stay with me for the night. Okay? And the interesting thing is then he brings them in, and it says that he makes for them a mishteh. Now, mishteh, as we know, is drinking. There's 3 different words we have for coming down and eat like a party. So there's mishteh, there's seudah, and there's misibah. They all indicate different things. Mishteh, we know also from the story of Esther and everywhere else, that the mishteh is really about the drinking. So he comes and he gets them in. The first thing he does is he gets them drinking. And then it says, terem, right about when they're about to, and it uses the word shachav, lay down, that's when the townspeople come and everything wreaks havoc, with the whole story that we know. So it sounds to me like he's trying to get them in, that he has designs on them. He gets them drunk. He's about to lay down with them. This is what I get. I mean, all this is my own, so again, you can leave it, but it's based on the words that's used. It's the hunch that I get. And the reason why also is it's very interesting. They when he invites them, they say, no, we'll sleep on the street. When Abraham invites them, they said, okay, we'll stay. So I think that because of his choice of words, they were on to the fact that, I don't think so. And then it says, Vayifsar, he pressed them very much. And so it says, and then they came in. This word Vayifsar is the same exact word that's used when he's talking to the people of Sodom, and they say, get away. And they said, then they pressed to get into the men. The same word that it uses with Lot trying to convince them is the same word it uses for the men of Sodom trying to get access to the men inside. So there's that similarity as well, which is very curious. And another thing that I noticed is it's interesting because Abraham was in an ohel. He was residing in the ohel because we know he's wandering about. He's got a tent. He's pitching his tent. Now, when it talks about Lot and he moved to Sodom, he's in a full-fledged house. It says bayit. It calls it a bayit twice. It says when he went outside, it says, and he shut the door behind him. And before he offers, when they said, okay, who do you have in your house? Let us know them. It says that he went out and shut the door behind him. And then he says, because in my mind's eye, when I read the story, I thought like, oh, they all knew he offered the daughters. It's not so clear cut that they all knew that he was offering the daughters. He went out, the door was shut. He's like, you know what, take my daughters instead. I'm still thinking he has designs on the guys inside. And he's like, you take them, these guys came under my roof, they're mine, that's the way I see it. And the fact that he's trying to hide all of this, and he's trying to do it under wraps in his house, he doesn't want anybody to know them to know his plan, them inside to know the plan. Nobody's going to know. Only he's going to know what he's going to do after he gets these guys drunk. And I think that that's the Mida Keneged Mida at the end, when Mida Keneged Mida, he offers the daughters end up, betting him and naming the kids forevermore. Everybody knows Lot is not the most virtuous man in the world, and he's given to engaging in what we think nowadays with our modern sensibilities, the lowest form of sexual activity is to have incestuous relationships. And then he goes down in the books like that because, and I think this is a big lesson, you can't hide anything. You're going to sin, it's going to come out. So be careful what you do behind closed doors, because there are no secrets, That's the way I see it.
Yeah, it's an interesting literary parallelism that you're pointing out as far as the hiding and the sexual, boundary crossing, we might say. It's also interesting that he's happy to offer them, he's happy to offer his daughters, his virgin daughters, but don't do anything to these men. For me, what's fascinating as far as what's a stark contrast is the foregrounding of Lot in this part of the story as while still in Stone, and the daughters are entirely quiet and silent. Whereas at the end of the chapter, in the verses 30 through 38, he's entirely in the background. He happens to be there, but he's not a subject really. It's the daughters who are really the older daughter who's got the speaking part, the active part.
Right. I mean, I'm in love with, because I've been seeing a lot. I mean, I don't know, I know that I have modern sensibilities, but I'm seeing a lot of women taking charge in the last few Parshiot, and look, as we know, they're given, again, we think of it, it repulses us, but they're given credit because their intentions, at least, were what they believe to be noble intentions. And I mean, I don't think you can blame these girls who were brought up obviously in a very, very messed up home, in a very, very messed up society, and if they had their acts all together, that would be a shocker too. I mean, I don't think that happens in a nutshell. So I think they did the best that they could, and they took charge to try and to do the right thing. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible even. And you have to think about them bringing up their fathers very old and alone women with just a child in that day and age. It's not like today where, you go and you get a job and you do your thing. It wasn't so simple. And, I mean, woman power. What can I say?
It's also interesting because one thing that really I'm shocked that it doesn't get mentioned here is the trauma that all three of them are dealing with, because they left Sodom, which is, must have been quite a travail in and of itself. But on the way to escaping, they lose their mother.
Right.
And so now they finally got a place to settle again. They've all lost either their wife or their mother, so they're probably not in a good headspace to start with.
Right.
Traumatic. They lost all their friends from Stone. They lose their mother or wife, and that I'm shocked that trauma goes entirely unmentioned. There's no sense of mourning either that gets mentioned, which is also intriguing.
We're not hearing about the mass destruction that they went through, and losing their mother and losing everything behind, and how traumatic that is. And I do think, like, you see that with the second daughter naming the son Ben Ami. I think that's a tribute to everything she lost. I think that you really feel it from her more. That's a sense that I always got, because she's including her whole nation, and I think that you feel a little bit of that sense of that. And you do feel it from the fact that Lot, I mean, I don't understand this story. Maybe you can shed some light with Zohar when they're running out and Lot asks the angels, he says, can you just save this little place? Zohar, it's small. Come on, just save that. And I'll go there, because if I have to go to the mountains, death's going to catch me. So stick to me. I don't know what that means exactly. And so the angels say, okay, we'll give you Zohar. And then he goes to Zohar, but what do you know? The next thing, he packs up and he leaves Zohar and he heads to the mountains, where he professed not to want to go because death was going to find him there. So I'm not so sure why he, wanted to go there so badly and then left it anyways and headed for the mountain. But you do get a sense of the depression, you know?
It's really fascinating. You're right. Bringing this up about I cannot flee to the hills lest the disaster overtake me. So fast. He's like, I can't go to the hills because disaster is going to overtake me and I'm going to die. But he ultimately does go to the hill country. Right?
Right. And is
but
that?
funny, but we don't necessarily see that disaster necessarily overtakes him. But
Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. We see that disaster happen with his daughters. That's a disaster if there's ever one. I'll tell you something. That's what
not so clear. Not so clear.
Not so clear. But maybe that's what you said. Maybe you just shed light on this, that it was so traumatic and it was so difficult that at first, I think he said that before his wife turned into a pillar of salt. And at first, he still had that will, that drive to live because this all happened so fast. But then after he went to Sohar and his wife turned into a pillar of salt and he lost everything, maybe he lost that will to live. He didn't care if he went up to the mountaintops and death caught up with him. Maybe he felt like, I'm giving up now. I can't anymore. You know, I failed on my mission in life and just headed for the hills into the cave and just wanted to settle down and die there. It could be from that traumatic experience that he just gave up, you know?
It's also interesting because it says, in verse 30, Lot went up from Zoar, vile Lot meets Zoar. But why? Like, why did he then go and what was, maybe, I mean, it could be a little irony, I'm just throwing this in, of maybe he thought that the potential disaster would be in the hills, but actually it was already in Zoar. And so he made the wrong assumption about what he could expect, and he had just different expectations of what could happen. He already had the loss of his wife, and it was just like during that transition. So I don't know. Right. It is interesting in thinking about that, the departure from Zohar, but I really think there is a trauma. They don't even talk about the trauma of having lost him, losing his wife, and the daughters losing their mother. I'm shocked it doesn't even come up. I mean, we do see that later. I think, who is it? Isaac, who after the death of his mother, right, Sarah, that he needed to be sort of like comforted. Mm-hmm. And so that's how Rebecca comes along, like, oh, I need to be comforted. But we don't even see that here with any of these three actors here, with the two daughters and Lot. There's no necessity of comfort, desire. But that, I don't know if that's, if she had still been in the picture, it could have been through, who knows, maybe Lot and her could have done the repopulation, but without her, they are the only wombs present. And so they see this necessity.
Right. And again, I mean, I don't know anything about Lot's wife, but I don't know, what a picturesque, mother/wife that she was. She's not painted in the best light. We're told that, I think there's also that she went to the neighbors to ask for salt, because that's why she turned real salt, because she wanted to let on to the fact that there were neighbors there. She was kind of blowing the whistle. I don't think she's not painted in the best light. That doesn't necessarily mean that, look, that the husband and the children aren't attached to her and that they didn't suffer a loss, just because she's not an angel. But I guess, it's not relevant to the story, and that's why we're not told about it. But I think those little details that we're given, I think it alludes to all of that you're saying.
Yeah.
I think, you're giving it here and there.
Yeah. Since we're talking about language in different terms, I like the theme that we established earlier on, is one word we don't ever see in the story is drunk. We never see the word drunk come up. We do see it appear other times in Genesis. Of course, the first time is Parshat Noach, where he gets drunk off of the wine. We also later see it in the book of Genesis when Joseph's brothers go to Egypt, that they have a nice little banquet, they have a mishteh, and they all get drunk. And nothing happens. They all just get drunk. It's really fascinating. But here it doesn't even use that word of drunk. It's just, to some degree, it's just he's so far gone in his drunkenness in the consumption that it just says he doesn't know what's going on. He just doesn't know what's flying.
Right. Which I think, I since you bring it up, I really think that's a very important distinction, because drinking, just like anything else, I don't think, it's meant to be seen as, it's not a good thing, but it's not a bad thing. It's really, it really depends on who you are, what you're doing, who you're doing it with. I mean, all of that is very relevant. And I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why they say that the way to really know a person is Bakaso, Bakiso, and Bakosa, right? So because why would we on Nichnas Yayin Yatzasod? So what comes out when you drink? Look, you have to be careful. If you got a lot of things you want to hide, or if you have a lot of bad qualities that you work so hard in your, in your lucid state to hide, that if you're going to drink, it's going to come out. But I think if you're drinking can be used for kedusha, or it could be used to a disgrace, and it depends how you do it, where you do it, why you do it, who you are, know yourself, and do it responsibly, and then everything's okay. It's just when it can go wrong, it can go very, very wrong. Just like a speeding car is a bad thing on the road, but if it's an ambulance, it could save a life. I mean, I hate when people make these blanket statements, and I understand why. I understand that alcoholism is a problem, and so people just try and say it's a bad thing. But I just think that that's not the right way to go about something. I think that it doesn't cure the problem if you just don't have alcohol. An alcoholic goes to alcohol for a reason, just like any other problem. So it's really about just knowing how to use it responsibly. And it could be for the highest kedusha, like we know. You use it for kiddush, you use it for all sorts of things that are holy. So
and even just the way that the book of Genesis or Sefer Bereshit positions wine. Yes, we have these two early stories involving both Lot and his daughters and Noah and his sons, and there's some, I think, okay, so I'm just going to say this. With Noah, that was the very first appearance of wine in the entire Tanakh and the entire Bible. And I think it was, my belief is that Noah didn't know what this was. It was just yummy grape juice. And no one ever had been shown to be drinking in Tanakh. He's the first person to experience it. If you don't know the power and potential of what wine can do, it can overtake you. And I think that's what happened with Noah, is that he just loved this yummy grape juice and it knocked him out, right? And he got drunk off of it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And then we see in last week's Torah portion, we see Melchizedek giving Abraham both bread and wine. So it's now seen to be regarded as a powerful, it's got some potency to it. It's a potent potable, and he gives it to Abraham. And then here in this week's Parsha with Lot and his daughters, they are, I don't want to say weaponizing wine, but they know the power of it. They know what it can do. And as we see, even till the present day, that people can use alcohol to get people to do sexual stuff with them without their knowledge, right? That's something that didn't only exist in biblical times. That's something that's existed throughout the entirety of humanity, is people using alcohol to get their sexual way with someone else.
Right, but but I'm glad you're pointing that out, because when you're saying that, each person who drank the alcohol wasn't somebody who did something wrong, but they were a victim, right? Like, so Noach was a victim, and Lot was a victim. And the fact is that them drinking in and of itself is not the problem. I mean, it's the same thing like blaming somebody who gets raped on the short skirt. I'm saying it's like maybe something because of that happened, but does that make that thing in and of itself the reason for it happening? It's the person with the intent who perpetrated the wrongdoing. So yes, then you have to be careful if you're going to drink, who you're drinking with. That you trust them enough? Are they trustworthy that they're not going to take advantage of you or do something that you don't want to be in a vulnerable position? So I mean, I think that's also, the Gemara really addresses that. I think when it talks about wine, I did a little bit of looking into this before, and it says that the women, it talks about whether you can, I think it's in Ketuvot, what we're talking about, whether the woman can have wine or not have wine. And it talks about whether, is she used to drinking, does she normally drink, does she not drink? And then it says if she's used to drinking 2 cups, she can have 1 when she's not with her husband, 2 when she is. And it always does that, because it doesn't want to put her in a vulnerable position with somebody else. So it gives you guidelines to make it that you're not going to be a victim. But again, I don't think it's the the alcohol that's a problem. I think it's the person with the bad intentions that's a problem. Do you want to put yourself in a vulnerable position? No. So you do have to be careful. But then again, I don't know that I want to make alcohol, just like I don't want to say that, a knife is a weapon. Yes, it's a weapon, but if you give it to a surgeon to do surgery, it's good. So I don't like when you blame the weapon when you have bad people doing bad things. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that's the problem that I have with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned Lot as being a victim here, because I don't know that he's really a victim. He's definitely sort of used as a sexual object, and he has really no agency in the matter, right? In what's going on. Although it's not clear, I mean, certainly from the biblical text about Lot, his agency, any knowledge, like it's not like Noah, where Noah, when he woke up from his drunkenness, he realized what had happened to him, whatever it was, but something had happened. Here, it doesn't even acknowledge that Lot, when he woke up, was like, oh, wow, like what happened last night? And then he gets drunk again the subsequent night. So, or it's interesting. It's not even clear where he is. And then also, as you mentioned earlier, there's no attribution of judgment regarding the daughters of Lot.
Yeah, well, two things. First of all, eventually he knows, right? Because his daughters have kids, and they name him. Yeah. I think May-Av is a little bit of a clue. But you're going to say he didn't know. The Torah says he didn't know when he laid down and when he got up. If we don't look at the dot on top that says he really didn't know and let himself the second night, fine. That could be. But the reason why I say he's a victim is because anybody who's being used for a purpose without their knowledge is a victim. It's not the right thing to do to take. I mean, again, judgment aside on this situation, but I'm just because I don't need anyone coming to me in a dream tonight. But I'm just saying, in terms of if we're looking at it in an isolated, way of what's right to do and what's not right to do, is that it's never right to take advantage of somebody, their body, their property, their anything that's not yours without their knowledge. That's just, that makes you a victim when somebody's doing it against your will or knowledge or judgment or any of that, who knows? I don't even know that they, according to way, some people talk about it, they probably didn't even have to get him drunk in order to, if you go according to the one that said that he actually did have desire for his daughters. I don't know which one's right and which one's not, but in the end of the day, I don't know.
Yeah. So here's one little thing that I think it's not a value judgment on the daughters or Lot for that matter, but it's more of the judgment on Ammon and Moab, the resulting progeny of these two night drunken encounters, which is I think what ultimately happens is both Ammon and Moab, as well as Canaan from the Noah story, that all three of these nations are the result of drunken incestuous relationships. And that ultimately it plays out later on as to what is the sort of the moral character of these nations later on when Bnei Israel, when the Israelites are trying to find a place to settle, and that they are just not kind nations. Ammon isn't hospitable, Moab isn't either. Ultimately, the land of Canaan is given over to Bnei Israel, to the Israelites, because they were not behaving well, right? It's specified. And I think that's ultimately it's not so much about the way that what happened as to these nations were not behaving morally. Why not? Well, think about their origins. What was their start? Well, it was out of a drunken incestuous relationship. And from the very beginning, it was there was something wrong with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a concept that I really believe very strongly, and that we're told is that everything, if you want to look at something, you look at its point of origin, and that will tell you a lot about something. But that's what I really like about, I was having this discussion actually with my husband about Mashiach coming from, Ruth, who comes from Moab, and all of this, and you know, and I just kind of spit out from my past, you know, because the daughters had good intentions and the whatever. But when I was thinking about it and when we were discussing it, it came clear to me something that was, I think, it was like a revelation of looking at it a totally different way. Is that when Mashiach comes, you know, we're told the same thing that we're going to bless the bad, the same that we bless the good, right? We don't just like now we just make tov meitiv and we say Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. We differentiate between bad and good when in reality it's all God's plan. It's all good. And so I think that this is part of the concept, meaning in this world there's a lot of evil, there's a lot of bad things, there's a lot of bad acts, not being hospitable, rape, the drunk, all these bad things. But at the point when we come to the end of the days where you can take everything that's happened and build from it and turn it around to something good, and you can go from the lowest point and turn the lowest point into the Mashiach, that's when we've really gotten there. Because it's really easy to be good if you come from Abraham Avinu, right? No big chiddush. You're going to get somebody wonderful coming from a clean line of descendants of tzaddikim. But if you can get people that have worked on themselves through the generations and finally got there to the point of developing into a Melech HaMashiach, like that's huge. And that's when we really arrive. That's when we can bless the good and the bad, because the bad we've turned into the ultimate good.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, thanks.
Really it's a nice way of tidying it, you know, packaging it together and tying it together.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Aliza, thank you so much. This is really great having this conversation about Lot and his daughters, this incident in this week's Torah portion. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Well,
really enjoyed it.
Wonderful to hear. All right. Thank you so much, and l'chaim.
Chaim.